Okay, fourth graders, last time we met for math, we were looking at comparing fractions, and we were using that to determine if a fraction was greater than or less than another fraction. And when we were doing that, we were changing the denominator on both fractions so that it was easier to compare. So today we are going to be ordering fractions. We're going to be doing it from least to greatest. But the thing that you'll notice about these fractions is I have 1/2, 4/9, and 4/18. And so what do you notice about those fractions? If you notice that the denominator is different in all of them, you are correct. I have a 2, I have a 9, and I have an 18. So in order to compare these fractions, I have to change the denominator to a common factor or a common denominator. So as what I'm going to have you do is you can, usually if you know your facts, it will help you with this. If you don't, then you can use a multiplication chart to help you. So as what you're going to want to do is on the multiplication chart, you're going to look at your factors of 2, your factors of 9, and then your factors of 18 we don't have on a multiplication chart, but you're going to try to think about if you skip counted by 18, what number would you see in the 2 column, the 9 column, and the 18? Well, I know that 2 can get to 18 for me. If I do 2 times 9, I get 18. And so remember, when we're changing numbers, anything you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. So my new equivalent fraction for 1/2 is 9 times 1, which is 9, and 2 times 9, which is 18. So I have an equivalent fraction of 9/18. I know that 9 times 2 equals 18. So I'm going to make a new equivalent fraction. When I'm doing equivalent fractions, whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. So now I'm going to do 4 times 2, which is 8, and 9 times 2, which is 18. So my equivalent fraction is 8/18. And then my last one, I already have an 18, so I don't need to do anything different to 4/18. So now I have 3 fractions that I need to order that all have an 18 as their denominator. So if I'm going to go from least to greatest, my smallest fraction is 4/18. And then what would be the next one? If you said 8/18, you are correct. And then the last fraction would be 9/18. All right, so that is how we order fractions. We need to change the denominator to where it is a common denominator. All right, let's go ahead and try it on these problems. So we're looking at 3/4, 2/3, and 7/8. So we first need to find a common factor for 3/4, 2/3, and 7/8. So look in the 4 column, the 3 column, and the 8 column on your multiplication chart to see what number they all have in common. So if you've looked, you should be able to see that 24 is what they would have in common. All right, so 24 now is our new common denominator. So now we have to think to ourselves, 4 times what gave us 24? And so we know that 4 times 6 gives us 24, so I have to do 3 times 6 for my equivalent fraction. So 3 times 6 is 18. All right, then I go to my 3. 3 times what gives me 24? 3 times what gives me 24? All right, and we know that 3 times 8 gives us 24. So then I need to do to the top 2 times 8. 2 times 8 is 16. And then our last one, 8 times 3 equals 24. So I need to do 7 times 3. And so 7 times 3 is 21. So now when I put these in order, from least to greatest, I have 16 24ths, then I have 18 24ths, and then I have 21 24ths. So now my fractions are in order from least to greatest. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and work on problem 3. So make sure that as you're watching this, you are writing down the information and the answers as we go. So we are looking at 3/10, 4/30, and 4/5. And so we need to decide what's the common factor between 10, 30, and 5. So 10 and 30 already end in zeros, so that gives us a clue that we know that we can do 10 times the number to get 30. We can do 5 times the number to get 30. So our common factor is going to be 30. So our common denominator is going to be 30. All right, so now this is when we need to know our multiplication. We need to say 10 times what number gives us 30? So think to yourself, 10 times what number gives you 30? If you said 3, you are correct. So because I multiply the denominator by 3, I have to multiply the numerator by 3. And we know that 3 times 3 is 9. So our new fraction is 9/30. For 4/30, we already have 30 in the denominator, so we don't need to change it. So I can keep my 4. And for the last one, we have a 5. So 5 times what gives us 30? So we can count by 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. We know that 5 times 6 gives us 30. Anything I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So then 4 times 6 is 24. So now we have 9/30, 4/30, and 24/30. And so by looking at these, the denominator is the same. It's a 30, so it makes it very easy to compare because we're just paying attention to the numerator. So since we're going from least to greatest, we're going to put them in order from the smallest, 4/30, to the next, which is 9/30, and the last one is 24/30. Okay, so our fractions are in order from least to greatest. So make sure on your paper you have the multiplication that we did to change our answers or our fractions so that they all had the same common denominator, which was 30. All right, now we're moving on to problem 4. So we have 1/2, 3/10, and 4/5. So you can see our denominators are a 2, a 10, and a 5. So I need to think, what number do they all have in common? So again, with this one's a little bit easier for us because we have a 10 that ends in a 0 and we have a 5. So we know that any number that ends in 0 is even, so our common denominator is going to be the 10. So let's look at 1/2. What do we need to do to the 2 to make it a 10? We've decided that 10 is going to be our new denominator. So we say 2 times 5 equals 10. So if 2 times 5 equals 10, here's our 10 already down here, we now need to do 1 times 5, which equals 5. All right, moving on to 3/10. The 10 is already here. It's down there, so we don't need to change anything. We're going to keep 3/10 the way it is. And then we come over to 4/5. 5 times what gives us 10? 5 times 2 gives us 10. So I need to multiply the numerator by 2. So 4 times 2 is 8. So now we have our new fractions to compare. If we're putting them in order from least to greatest, we're going to do 3/10 because 3 is the smallest numerator, then 5/10, and then 8/10. So our fractions are in order from least to greatest. Okay, so now for problem 5, I would like for you to be working through this on your paper. So we're comparing 7/10, 9/20, and 4/5. So first we need to think, what is going to be our common denominator? So when we look, we have a 10, a 20, and a 5. So we're going to go with the highest number, which is 20. So we're going to make 20 our new denominator. So we're going to do 20 for each of these. Now the next step is that you are going to be multiplying. So you need to think, what times each of these numbers gave you 20? So as you're doing this multiplication work, I would like for you to pause the video. When you finish the multiplication work and have found the 3 new equivalent fractions, unpause the video so you can check your work. So go ahead and pause the video now so you can work through this problem. Okay, hopefully now you have worked through the problem and you're going to check your work. So if we look at the 10, we need to figure out 10 times what number gives us 20. And we know that 10 times 2 gives us 20. So if I'm doing 10 times 2 on the bottom, I need to do 7 times 2 on the top, which is 14. All right, then we look at 9/20. Well, there's already a 20 there, so I could just do 20 times 1 and 9 times 1. 9 times 1 is 9. It stays the same. I don't need to change it. And for 4/5, 5 times what number gives us 20? I can count by 5s, and I know 5 times 4 is 20. So then I need to do 4 times 4. So 4 times 4, I always think to myself, I need to be 16 to drive a 4x4 truck. So the answer to 4 times 4 is 16. So then your equivalent fractions that you found were 14/20, 9/20, and 16/20. And if you put them in order from least to greatest, you should have 9/20, then 14/20, then 16/20. So that is those are our fractions in order from least to greatest. Okay, for the 6th problem, you have 2/3, 1/4, and 5/12. So go ahead and find the common denominator for 2/3, 1/4, and 5/12, and put the fractions in order from least to greatest. Pause the video while you're working through them, and then when you have completed the entire problem and you have the fractions in order, then you can unpause the video to check your work. So go ahead and pause the video now to work through this problem. Okay, so now you should have your work completed, and we're going to go ahead and check the work that you did. So on 2/3, 1/4, and 5/12, our common denominator is going to be 12. So we're going to have the 12 as the common denominator. So first we have to think to ourselves, 3 times what number gives us 12? And it's 3 times 4. So I need to do 2 times 4. So 2 times 4 is 8. So I now have 8/12. For the next one, 1/4, I need to think to myself, 4 times what gives me 12? And it's 4 times 3 gives me 12. And then I need to do 1 times 3, which is 3. So my new fraction is 3/12. And for the last one, 12 times 1 gives me 12, so I do 5 times 1. So my fraction stays the same at 5/12. So now when I'm going to put the fractions in order from least to greatest, I'm going to do 3/12, 5/12, and 8/12. All right, and so that is how we order fractions from least to greatest. Now that you have finished all 6 of the problems, Make sure you have your name on your paper and turn it in to the teacher, and you'll be given your next task. Thanks for working hard. Good job.